What a blessed thing it is to be in God's presence. It pleased the Lord for the sake of his righteousness to make his law great and glorious. And when God is glorious, we experience his goodness. What a tremendous thing to be led by Sifa voices. I've never had a great voice. In the high school, they allowed me to go into the choir. But that's because I think many boys did not like to sing treble. And I could at that point. And then only later in life did I discover that I actually sing slightly off, flattish like this kidogo. But I enjoy Sifa voices. I have their CD. When I'm in my office and the work is not coming, at least I put on the music and even that kasong, try and salsa to it. Mungu ni mwema. Sifa apewe. It is a good thing to be in your midst. How are you feeling today? What is the state of your emotions? Emotions are difficult things for many of us. In fact, we are told to be very, very careful about our emotions because they can lead you to do things and say things as if you're out of control. And so in many quarters, emotions have become the kind of things that you quash. But then you have to look at the theme for this month. As you know, this whole year we've been considering the whole subject of a worshiping community, the whole concept of worship. And he went through 2 months of the book of Revelation. In November, we're in the Psalms. And the Psalms are a record of an emotional response to God. So that even for this month, those who are wiser than I have decided that the theme for this month, as we consider worship, is count it all joy. And the word joy resonates with emotion. It isn't just something that you need to enjoy. You cannot enjoy and just be still. Are you with me? Yet when we come to the whole issue of God and the Psalms and worship, it's very, very difficult to put all those things together. Our emotions, this God, and our circumstances. Yet, we are being instructed to count it all joy. That's the theme for this month. And will take us through in the book of Psalms. We'll take different Psalms to see how the psalmists respond. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials. For the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives to all men generously and without reproach. That's how James begins his epistle. How are you supposed to count it joy when you're going through trials? And then you come and tell us that yes, not only that, but it is possible to worship God even as you go through trials. And as soon as I say this, some of you think, you cannot do that. Because perhaps for some of us, we think of worship as music, as something that comes out of the top of how we feel. But I am going to suggest to you that worship is not just something that we do. It comes from somewhere deep down in the very center of our souls, troubled as they sometimes are by other extrinsic factors, things that are being done to you, or intrinsic factors, things that come out from within you as a result of your life and your experience. But it is possible, is it, to worship God in the midst of our trials? Now, I'm not suggesting that you start singing like a chorus because I'm in trouble. Because that then seems to run contrary to the very core of what it is that I'm going through. It somehow submerges this whole thing that I cannot make sense, and singing does not necessarily make sense to sing in the midst of my trials. In fact, we have to be careful that we do not see worship as a manipulative thing that I do with God so that he can change my circumstances. It's as if it's what they call a quid pro quo. I, God, will worship you, you will sort out my problems. Have you ever been in that kind of situation? What that does is that it hides, it denies, it has a way of hoodwinking you into thinking that somehow the circumstances you face are not real, or somehow you do not have the capacity to go through this particular situation, difficult as it is, whether coming from the outside or the inside. You somehow do not have what it is. And some of us are tempted to turn to God and almost as if to bribe him, tell him, I will praise you, you take care of my problem. Now, worship is an end in itself. We can worship God because he is worthy of our worship. But worship is not an exercise where I hoodwink myself, that in saying, God, I'm just praising you here, right? I'm singing all the songs and denying the reality of the circumstances that I'm in, thinking that because I'm praising here, he will take care of things here. What you have in the psalm, and in this 5th psalm, is a man called David who is dealing with a situation of enmity. He has enemies, very real ones, and he is thinking his way, he's praying his way through this situation, coming through it and ending up praising God in worship. That's what you have. And my thesis this morning, what I want you to go away with this morning, is that it is possible, difficult as the circumstances we find ourselves in, whether they have been done to us or we are the victims of our own sin and sinfulness, it is possible to so come into that situation with a mind of worship and to find that you truly worship God. For you see, worship is not saying, let us worship God. Now I've worshipped God because I've sung a song. It is possible to worship God without music. It is possible to worship God without a song. For you see, worship is not the fruit of our lips just coming from here. It comes out of deep in here. And our souls are that which engage with the circumstances. The Christian life is the greatest test of reality there ever is. And so when we talk about counted joy in difficult circumstances, the Psalms will help us this month to see how that is possible even in the different circumstances that are presented. And so in Psalm 5, we have one of those. It's a morning prayer. It's a psalm. It's poetry. And there are some traditions, if you will, where people used to sing the psalms as they are. The collection of the psalms is called the Psalter, Psalter. And there is a tradition. I grew up in the Anglican tradition, and we used to sing the psalms. Jubilate Deo, Psalm 100. And the 24th Psalm still come to my mind, singing the Psalms. Now we sometimes think, this thing is too old-fashioned. And we think what we've sung, modern songs are it. Now there's nothing wrong with modern songs. But there is a way in which when you look at the Psalms, you see a man or men who are writing in the real circumstances of life, bringing God themselves and those circumstances, and in thinking their way through, praying their way through, they end up worshiping God. Therefore, I beseech you, my beloved brethren, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, which is a passage that we've come back and forth many times this year. And so what you have here in Psalm 5, and indeed in the Psalms that we will cover, is how this man does not want to be conformed to the world, to become like his enemies. But he sacrifices literally his feelings, his lack of understanding. He thinks his way through. He is transformed in so doing to become a true worshiper, like he says in Romans 12:1. This is your acceptable worship. And so let us not see worship as just something, we do on the side. Worship flows out of this deep experience and engagement with the reality of the difficulties of life, the greatness and the goodness and the sovereignty, the immensity of God, and who you and I are becoming. It is central to what you and I will become for us to think our way through the situations. Now, the difficult thing is, many of us don't want to think. Thinking is very, very hard work. I know. It's taken me many hours to think my way through Psalm 5. And so we sometimes want to delegate the thinking to someone else. We've become the age in our modern world where we want everything done for us. We don't want to do the hard work ourselves. If we can receive it already done, why not? And we've become an age where perfection, everything being perfect is good. Even if I'm not responsible for producing that perfection, at least I can enjoy it. And so we want people to think for us. Children want parents to do their homework for them. How many of you have not suffered that temptation with standard 7 and 8 kids preparing for KCPE? And the temptation to do their homework for them. As parents, we're over-parenting our children and protecting them from everything because we want to raise perfect children. And we sometimes overprotect them, and so they don't come into some of the tough experiences of life. Well, you know what? If they come to faith, they will see tough experiences. God is going to engineer circumstances, allow things to happen in their life that, hey, they will realize that, only as they think their way through to a greater knowledge of who God is, as he says in the scriptures, a greater awareness of who they are in God, and an insightful understanding as to the nature of life and its circumstances. It is those kind of people who become true worshipers. Real life, bleeding, breathing believers. That, dear friends, is what we have in Psalm 5. And so he begins this prayer by calling attention to God. In one sense, it's fairly audacious. For he says, "Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my sighing. Listen to my cry for help, my King and my God." When was the last time you asked God to listen to you? Who are you to give God an order? Listen to me. Give ear to my words. But you see, this is a man who knows God. This is a man who has a relationship with God. This is a man who knows that God is not cast aside in the difficulties of life, but he is brought into those very situations to both transform me and through it, my impact on those circumstances for his glory. He's worthy of invitation when things are rough. Not cast aside because I want to do it in my own strength. Give ear to my words, O Lord. My words. It's a prayer because prayer is word. He later on talks about his voice. Prayer is words. But I'm going to suggest to you it's more than words. Give ear to my sighing. Now, is sighing words? Isn't sighing the language of the soul? The unverbalized but very real language of the soul coming from deep down within us. So prayer is both word, but it's also what you think. In some of the versions of the Bible, in Psalm 5 verse 1, it says, "Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my meditations." What you think is important to prayer. In fact, I'll be so bold to suggest to you that your thoughts can be thoughts of prayer. My late mother, after coming to true faith, had a ladies group visit, the neighborhood ladies group visiting, and she was hosting. And she wasn't too confident in her ability to host. Others in the group were older in the faith, more attuned to the ways of the Bible. So she invited my wife and I to co-host with her. And she took care of all the domestic logistic issues, the shy and all the nice things. And my wife, Flo, and I had the responsibility of both bringing the word and leading in prayer. And we did, and we had a terrific afternoon. Afterwards, I was talking to her, and I was asking, so why didn't you do it? And she said, Waero, which is my affectionate name, I don't have the words. Literally, I don't have the words. I can't pray like that. That's interesting. It is possible for you and I to think that prayer is the ability to produce words. And so the people who pray well are the ones who can string words together. But you can bring words together, but not be praying. They're empty words. It's a performance. Prayer comes from deep down in the soul and sometimes is conveyed by our meditations, our sighings. And so David, in the circumstances that we'll soon see, is entreating the Lord, come, be in this situation. Come, O Lord, give ear to my cry. Verse 3, in the morning, O Lord, you hear my voice. There's the thing about voice. You hear my voice. In the morning, I lay my requests before you and wait in expectation. So here is David in difficult circumstances, entreating the Lord to become part and parcel of those, and he is going to wait in expectation, this confident expectation that almost has a ring of audacity to it. But you see, when you know the Lord, he is no longer some foreign, faraway God. He is with us. But he needs to be with us, especially when we go through perplexing times. And so after that invitation and his confident expectation that God will work, audacious as it is, rooted in his relationship with God, he now gets on to describe to you and I what is the situation that he faces. Now, we are not particularly sure what the specific circumstances are that surround Psalm 5. There are other Psalms where we know the circumstances that David was in. But Psalm 5 is a generalized type situation. It has to do with the fact that David had enemies. And we all know the story of David and the number of enemies he had to face, especially through King Saul. And so now he allows us, having asked God to enter into his situation, give ear to my cry, my words, my voice, my sighings, my meditation. Not only will I eagerly wait in expectation, but here's the situation. And notice how he describes them. And he does it in two lots. How he describes the situation, the people that he's facing, and the enmities that constitute the circumstances that he's in. He says this, verse 4. You are not God who takes pleasure in evil. Agreed? That's a generalization, which is true. With you, the wicked cannot dwell. So he is talking to his God, his king, and he's telling him what he is like. Now, why is David telling God why he's like? Why did he say, doesn't God know what he's like? Why is David asking God, listen to me, doesn't God hear everything? After all, isn't he present everywhere? But I suggest to you, it comes out of this, when you know God, you address him as someone who is close. And there's this familiarity. And so he says, you, God, do not take pleasure in evil. With you, the wicked cannot dwell. The arrogant cannot stand in your presence. You hate all who do wrong. And the list goes on. Verse 6. You destroy those who tell lies. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men, the Lord abhors. Those are statements of truth. How did David know that? Because in his walk with God, he had realized that is true of the holy character of God. When I was a young believer, and I would be reading the Psalms, and I enjoyed reading the Psalms, and memorize different passages in the Psalms, I used to wonder, God, I don't have enemies. I mean, I'm growing up in high school. Who has enemies in high school? maybe the guy who likes the girl that is in the Muru Girls that you think you like, but that's not really an enemy, you know. I mean, that's teenage stuff. But the kind of enemy that he talks about here, bloodthirsty people, people who are arrogant and so on. As a boy growing up, as a teenager, I said, Lord, who are these? And then my eyes were opened, and I suggest this to you. You may not have these kinds of enemies, but recognize that you and I as believers this morning have an enemy with a capital E. The evil one. Satan, as some people call him. The devil. And so if you do not have it, read that into here and you realize it's the same thing. God abhors those who are evil, who are arrogant, bloodthirsty men. In other words, people who have no problem spilling blood to get what it is that they want. And so David is real. And Christianity is real. Please do not sanitize your Christianity. Please do not think that somehow God is like, well, on Friday I went to a wedding. One of our young staff members was getting married. So I had to change. Because in the morning I had worn work type clothes. But then since it's a wedding, kawaida, right? I changed. Because I was going to a wedding. Because you have to look a particular. And there's this thing that some of us have that because I can't go to God as I am. I have to somehow, wash myself, do all those. Then I can appear before God. Do you have that problem? Some of us do. And it's almost like a works mentality that I have to do something to be acceptable to God. No, God says, come as you are, and we will walk through that situation together. And as we do so, you will learn more about who you are in me. You will learn about who I am in you. You will learn about who you are in the world. And you also learn about how I, God, am in your circumstances. This is what he says in those verses from 4 to 6. The nature of the people that God does not like. Tough, enemies, bloodthirsty, arrogant. But verse 7 starts with a 3-letter word. And it's going to come up again later. It's the word but. It also comes up in verse 11. But, verse 7. But I, by your great mercy, will come into your house. In reverence will I bow down toward you, toward your holy temple. And so the but now is whereas these people the Lord abhors, and therefore they will never ever get near where the Lord is, he can go into the Lord's presence. But and notice it's an issue of the will. But I will come into your house. William Shakespeare said, to be or not to be, that is the question. I suggest that's not really the question. The real question is, I will or I will not. That's really the question. For at the heart of how we transform circumstances, how we face circumstances, is this willingness not only first of all to recognize the nature of the difficult situation we're in and tell God about it, not that he doesn't know, but it helps us to help him know that we know that he knows, and what a wonderful thing that I know that he knows. And don't ask me to repeat that, it's not repeatable. On the other hand, right, having done that, I now myself come into the situation and will. But I will come into your presence. We'll see this again in Psalm 73 in 2 weeks' time. He comes into the presence of God. The abhorrent, the arrogant, the evil, the liars, those people run away from God. In fact, they're not acceptable to God, whereas he can. Do you know why David can run to the Lord? Because he knows the Lord. Not only that, he knows that he is known by God. Did you get that one? He knows that he's known by God. Simple illustration. Many years ago, we were doing evangelism as part of a small university students in Eldoret, just outside of Eldoret, in Elgeyo Marakwet. A small place, a small town called Chebororwa. Right? And I'd never been to Chebororwa before. I haven't been there since. But we went out evangelizing with the local elders. And I'm trying to explain to one of these people who live around Chabroro. It's in a little town in the hills surrounding it. I'm trying to explain to this man through an interpretation the importance of knowing God. And it's difficult to, how do you know that you know God? And then through the Spirit of God, I got an idea. I said to him, do you know President Moi? And this was during the era of President Moi. He lit up. It's funny, where unaongea kitu ambacho mimi najua. He lit up and he says, yes, I know President Moi. Okay, so yeah, tell me about it. You know, anaishi Kabarak, he drives a big car. Okay. I said, okay. Does President Moi know you? Ha ha! He laughed. Does President Moi know me? But that's the really important thing. It is not that he knew President Moi. The more important thing is that he knows President Moi knows him. It's the same thing with God. It is not so much that you know God, but do you know that you're known by God? It is that second order condition, if you will, that I know that I'm known by God, that enables me then, in the difficult circumstances of life, to bring myself to that situation. And in so doing, to will my way into transformation. For you see, the Psalter is a deeply emotional book. More people go to the Psalms perhaps than any other part of Scripture. And it's as if the Lord made it easy. Like George said, if you take your Bible, normally split it down the middle, it will usually land in the book of Psalms. We resonate with what it says. I would have despaired unless I believed I see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Be strong. The Lord is my shepherd. And on we could go. And so when you bring your will in the difficult circumstances, God works with that situation. And you begin to see transformation. You can tell a lot about a person. So for instance, if I was to ask you, what do you think is my favorite radio station, FM station in Kenya? Most of you are thinking BBC, and you'd be right. And so if I'm driving, invariably BBC, button number 6, I don't even have to look at it, is on. But then, since there are adult children in my house and we share a car, the car sometimes gets borrowed. And when I go in, it's some FM station that is kissing my way into easy music. And so I switch back to BBC. Because you see, you become like the thing that you associate with. Transformation is rooted in going over and over the same thing over time. And that's why the Psalter must be a more and more greater presence in our lives. If we're going to see the transformation, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. It is because we are listening to what he says and winning our way into it, because he not only understands our circumstances, but I know that I can come to him. And he does. And when he does, he makes this request. Verse 8. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make straight your ways before me. Your way before me. Can you see? Now he can pray the request. Because he's not only willed his way in the circumstances, but now he can make a request for the way to be made straight. Because you see, there's always the temptation, even for us believers, that we will act like our enemies. Make our way straight vis-a-vis deceitful people who tell lies. The danger about being a believer in handling life without God is that you handle life like a non-believer. David doesn't want to do that. So he requests, lead me in the way that is straight, into the straight path. Verse 9, reflects again, and there is a description about these people. They cannot be trusted. Their mouths, out of their mouths come, they cannot be trusted. Verse 9, their heart, notice it's a singular plural. Their heart is filled with destruction, all these things. So he's now, again, going back to describe these people, the people who are his enemies. Okay? After he's done that, he comes back and then asks the Lord, in the same spirit of this audacious but reverent asking of God. Verse 10. Declare them guilty, O Lord. Let their intrigues be their downfall. Banish them from their many sins. Is that right? Yeah. For they have rebelled against you. So just as he prays for himself a straight path because he knows the God to whom he's praying, he also prays to the same God to harass them because they rebel against God. There is, in those who study kidnapping, a thing called the Stockholm Syndrome. In the Stockholm Syndrome, a captive who has been held by people who are captors eventually begins to become like the captors and enters into their frame of thinking. This prayer is David's response against becoming like the very people he doesn't want to, the very people that he sees in the world who are his enemies. They're unholy. David wants to be holy. He's coming into the temple. He's praying that God will lead him, just as he's praying that God will confuse those people and totally annihilate them. If that is true, then, is it any wonder then he concludes the psalm with these words? Take it from verse 11. But, this is the second but. And whenever you see but, it's contradicting what has just said. It's a rebuttal. But let all who take refuge in you be glad. Let them ever sing for joy. Has David taken refuge in God? Has he avoided, distanced himself from taking refuge in the ways of the world? Yes. What is the result of so doing? They are singing with joy. Can you see how he's arrived at it? Because he has not run away from the difficulties of his circumstances. He's described them before God. He has also called upon the character of God, the attributes of God. And by so doing, you see this transformation of David right before your eyes. Now he's saying in verse 11, but let all who take refuge in you be glad. There's a spirit of gladness. There's a spirit of praise. Let them ever sing for joy. Spread your protection over them, that those who love you may love your name, may rejoice in you. For surely, O Lord, you bless the righteous. You surround them with favor as a shield. Can you see the transformation? We talk a lot these days about culture change. Some of you who have organizations talk about the importance of culture. And how we say strategy eats culture for breakfast. Well, let me tell you, if you want to change culture, get into the Psalms. Think your way through who you are in God, who God is in you, who you are in the circumstances, what the circumstances are in you, who God is in the circumstances, what the circumstances mean to God. And in that three-person triangle, if you will, three-situation triangle, come into a new understanding that is transformative. And so here's my challenge for us. On the first Sunday of December, we've been told we'll have a Thanksgiving service. Have you ever tried to write your prayer? Disabuse yourself of the easy work of just uttering words. Have you ever actually tried to write your prayer? Have you ever sat down to think your way through the situation, calling on who God is in the situation and you best understand Him, waiting upon God expectantly from the Spirit to reveal who you are in Him, who He is in you, what the circumstances are to you, what you are to the circumstances, what God is to the circumstances, what the circumstances are to God? Wouldn't it be fantastic if on the first Sunday in December, we could have some Psalms written and prayed and presented? Not for show, but as a glad response of saying to God, I am going to be the kind of person who will worship you in the circumstances that I find myself in. Not because I glibly say, Lord, may I praise you? No, but because I think my way through these circumstances so that there's a transforming experience both for me in the way I look to God and the way, therefore, I act in the circumstances, becoming in that circumstance, not a victim of them, but an agent of the fragrance of the grace of God. So here's your challenge. Here's a challenge to myself, to write a psalm. And maybe you will not read it here, but maybe share it with a member of the family. Maybe in your home group fellowship. That's my challenge. And so, dear friends, worship is bringing all that I am and all that I have in whatever situation to God so that He transforms me in the situation. His glory comes through. It is good for me. The knowledge of Him is spread. And we hasten the day of Christ's return. Amen. Amen.